Don't waste your life. In a crowded city filled with noise, ambition, and restless dreams, there lived a man named Edward. If you saw him on the street, you wouldn't notice anything special. He wore clean but simple clothes, walked with purpose, and always seemed to be on his way to something important. But the truth was, Edward was always on his way, yet he never arrived. Since childhood, Edward had been taught one thing above all else: be careful with your life. His father would often say, "Life is like money, spend it wisely, don't waste it." And Edward listened carefully. He listened so carefully that he misunderstood. Instead of living his life, Edward started saving it. When he was a boy, he loved drawing. He could sit for hours sketching mountains, people, and scenes from his imagination. His teacher once told him, "You have a gift. You should become an artist." Edward smiled politely, but that night he told himself, "I will draw later, when I have more time, when life is stable." So he closed his notebook and never opened it again. When he became a teenager, he fell in love with a girl named Rogin. She had a laugh that made the world feel lighter, as if problems didn't exist when she was near. Many times Edward wanted to tell her how he felt, but each time a voice stopped him. "Not now. You might ruin everything, wait for the right moment." The right moment never came. One day, Rogin left the city. Edward stood at a distance watching her go, holding words he had never spoken. He told himself, "It's okay. Love can wait. But some things don't wait." Years passed. Edward went to university, chose a safe career, and built a life that looked stable from the outside. He got a good job, saved money, and avoided risks. People respected him. "You're smart," they said. "You don't make mistakes," they said. And they were right. Edward didn't make mistakes, but he also didn't make memories. Every time he wanted to try something new, travel, start a business, learn music, meet new people, he postponed it. Later, he told himself, when I've more time, when I am ready, when things are perfect. He treated life like a precious object he couldn't afford to use. He kept saving it. At first, this didn't seem like a problem. In fact, it felt responsible. While others struggled, failed, and made chaotic choices, Edward stayed safe. He avoided heartbreak, financial loss, and embarrassment. But slowly something strange began to happen. A quiet emptiness started growing inside him. It wasn't loud. It didn't scream or demand attention. It simply existed, like a shadow that followed him everywhere. At night, when the city became quiet and distractions faded, Edward would feel it the most. He would sit in his apartment, surrounded by things he owned but didn't care about, and wonder, why doesn't this feel like enough? He had everything he thought he needed, but nothing he truly wanted. One evening, while walking home from work, Edward noticed an old bookstore he had never seen before. The sign was faded and the windows were dusty, but something about it pulled him in. Inside, the air smelled of paper and time. Books were stacked everywhere, on shelves, on the floor, even on small wooden tables. Behind the counter sat an old man with silver hair and calm eyes. "Welcome," the man said gently. Edward nodded and began browsing. Most of the books looked ancient, as if they had been forgotten by the world. Then, on a small table in the corner, he found a book unlike the others. It had no title. Its cover was plain, almost empty, except for one small symbol, a clock. Curious, Edward picked it up. "Ah," the old man said, watching him. "You found it." "What is this book?" Edward asked. The old man smiled. "It's your life," Edward frowned. "What do you mean?" "Open it," the man replied. Edward hesitated, then slowly opened the book. The first pages were filled with writing, his childhood, his memories, his thoughts. Everything, exactly as it had happened. Edward's heart began to race. "How is this possible?" he whispered. The old man didn't answer. He simply watched. Edward flipped through more pages. His teenage years, his time at university, his job. Every detail was there. But then something strange caught his attention. There were blank pages, many of them. Whole sections of the book were completely empty. "What are these?" Edward asked. The old man leaned forward slightly. "Those are the moments you saved." Edward felt a chill. "Saved?" he repeated. "Yes," the man said. "All the things you didn't do, the words you didn't say, the risks you didn't take, the life you postponed." Edward stared at the empty pages. "They're blank," he said. "Of course they are," the old man replied. "You never lived them." Silence filled the room. Edward's hands trembled as he turned more pages. Blank, blank, blank. Entire years. Empty. "But I was careful," Edward said, almost defensively. "I didn't want to make mistakes." The old man nodded slowly. "And you succeeded?" Edward looked up. "You made very few mistakes," the man continued, "but you also made very few choices." Edward felt something break inside him. "Can I fill them now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The old man's expression softened. "You can still write," he said, "but you cannot go back to the pages that have already passed." Edward looked down at the book again. For the first time in his life, he saw the truth clearly. He hadn't been protecting his life. He had been avoiding it. He had been so afraid of losing that he never allowed himself to gain. So afraid of failure that he never allowed success. So afraid of pain that he never allowed joy. He had treated time like something he could store, like money in a bank. But time doesn't work that way. If you don't use it, it disappears. Edward closed the book slowly. "What should I do?" he asked. The old man smiled gently. "Live before the pages run out." That night, Edward couldn't sleep. He sat by his window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. For years he had looked at this same view, but tonight it felt different. It felt temporary. For the first time he realised something deeply uncomfortable. He didn't have forever. The idea that once felt abstract now felt real. Time wasn't something he owned. It was something he was losing. Minute by minute, breath by breath. And suddenly all the things he had postponed felt heavy. The drawings he never made. The love he never confessed. The risks he never took. The places he never saw. The version of himself he never became. All of it. Gone. Not because he couldn't do them, but because he chose not to. The next morning, Edward did something unexpected. He didn't go to work. For the first time in years, he broke his routine. His phone rang. Messages came. Responsibilities waited. But Edward ignored them. Instead, he walked. No destination, no plan, just movement. The world felt different. Not because it had changed, but because he had. He noticed things he had never noticed before, the way sunlight touched buildings, the sound of laughter from a distant cafe, the feeling of wind against his face. It was as if he had been asleep for years, and was only now waking up. He stopped at a small shop and bought a notebook and a pencil. Then he sat in a park. His hands hesitated at first. It had been so long, but slowly he began to draw. Lines turned into shapes. Shapes turned into meaning. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. For the first time in decades, Edward felt something he had forgotten. Joy. Not the quiet, safe comfort he was used to, but a deeper, more alive feeling, a feeling that came from doing, not waiting. Days turned into weeks. Edward started making changes, small at first. He spoke to strangers. He tried new things. He said yes more often. He said no when it mattered. He made mistakes, many of them. But something surprising happened. The mistakes didn't destroy him. They taught him. They shaped him. They made his life feel full. One evening, while sitting in a cafe, Edward met someone who reminded him of his younger self, a man who spoke about all the things he wanted to do someday. Edward listened quietly. Then he said something simple. "Someday is not a day on the calendar." The man laughed, thinking it was just a clever phrase, but Edward didn't laugh, because he knew the truth behind it. Years later, Edward returned to the old bookstore, but it was gone. In its place was an empty space, as if it had never existed. For a moment he wondered if it had all been a dream. Then he looked at the notebook in his hands, filled with drawings, ideas, and memories, and he understood. The book had been real, not as an object, but as a truth. That night, Edward sat at his desk and imagined the pages of his life again. This time they were not blank. They were messy, imperfect, full of crossed-out lines, bold choices, unexpected turns. But they were written, and that made all the difference. Life does not reward those who wait forever. It does not pause until you are ready. It does not guarantee perfect conditions. It does not return the time you didn't use. You can spend your entire life preparing to live, and never actually live. You can avoid every risk and miss every opportunity. You can save your days carefully, only to realise, too late, that they were never meant to be saved. They were meant to be spent. So don't wait for the perfect moment. It doesn't exist. Don't wait until you feel ready. You may never feel ready. Don't wait for someday, because someday is just another way of saying never. Your life is not a practice. This is it. Every moment you hesitate, every chance you ignore, every dream you postpone, it becomes another empty page. And one day, whether you are ready or not, the book will close. The only question is, will your pages be blank, or will they tell a story worth remembering?